Hello, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of the Biochemical Society and Portland Press, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, which is part of our Biochemistry Focus webinar series. So topics in this series include different research areas in the molecular biosciences, and also practical sessions to support career development. Each webinar gives the opportunity to ask questions via text, and we welcome suggestions for future topics or speakers to feature in this webinar series. So if you do have any suggestions, please go over to the website for more details on how to make a suggestion. So I'm Dr. Sean Flynn. I work on gene regulation and chromatin at the University of Exeter. Recently started a research group, so I'm very much looking forward to today's talk. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Jen Heemstra from Washington University. Professor Heemstra is the Charles Allen Thomas Professor of Chemistry, an avid science communicator and mentor. She's received numerous awards for her teaching, research, and also leadership, including the Cottrell Scholar Award and the National Science Foundation Career Award. Today, Jen will be discussing key leadership ideas for her recently published book called Labwork to Leadership, which outlines essential strategies for motivating lab mentors, communicating key values, and inspiring confidence. So at the end of her presentation, Jen will take questions today, but you can and please do send in your questions during the talk. So if you have a question, please type it into the question box as shown in the image on the screen, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible as time allows. If you're a current resident of the UK or Republic of Ireland, some exciting news, you have the exclusive opportunity to win a free copy of Jen's book. To be entered into this giveaway, simply add #leadership to the end of your question when you submit it, and the winners will hopefully be announced at the end. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Jen, and look forward to your talk.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sean. Can everyone see my screen?
I can see it very clearly, yes.
Excellent. Let me just get set up here really quickly. Everything in the right place so that I can see my screen. All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for hosting me for this webinar, and thanks so much to everyone who is joining in. As Sean mentioned, I hope that you will drop your questions in the chat as we go through, because we will have lots of time for questions at the end. And as he mentioned, if you are a resident of the UK or the island, you have a chance to win a copy of the book. And so hopefully that's a fun bonus for asking a question. And so I'm delighted to join you today and talk about this topic of leadership, which is very near and dear to my heart. I will talk about how it's been so important in my own professional journey, both realizing that I didn't have these skills that I really needed, towards realizing that I could gain those skills just like I gained research skills. But before we dive in, I wanted to take a step back and address this question of what do we even mean when we use the words leader or when we talk about leadership? Because I think there's often these definitions that are out there, but they're often far too narrow for what this really entails. And so we will start with a little bit of participation. So I think this link will be dropped in the chat, or you can use the QR code, or you can just type in that link or use the text option. And I'll give you a second to do that. This will all be on the next slide as well, but it's a little bit more fun if everyone is logged in. If it asks you for your name, you can just click submit, and you don't have to leave a name if you don't want to. You can be anonymous. All right, so in one word, or with no spaces, leave no spaces, what are examples of things that leaders do? When you think of leaders or leadership, what are the sorts of things that that entails? Yeah, setting an example, inspiring, organizing, listening, mentoring. Oh, lots of good ones. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna try and follow this. Inspiring, I think I might have said that. Listening, that's a really important one. Helping, guiding, responsibility, influence, decisions, involves people, vision, adaptation, planning, providing, calculated risk taker, administrative, absolutely, delegating, deciding, coordinating, motivating, action. Great answers. Feel free to keep those coming in for a few more seconds here, and then I'll click forward. Oh, I love seeing all of these. That's wonderful. All right, so as you take a second to look over, I love loving. I saw that, being kind and caring. So as you look at this, right, these are a lot of different things. Leaders do lots of different things. And I would say that everyone here is a leader. If you are here, you are a leader, because it doesn't take a title to be a leader. You don't have to be this charismatic person who stands on a stage and, you know, gives speeches to lots of people or is out front leading a huge team. Really, a leader is anyone who sees something in the world that could be different and better, and then works individually or with others to make it that way. So if you've ever navigated a conflict with people or helped someone solve a problem or written something to advocate for change, or just inspired and motivated or cared about others, then by doing that, you are already a leader. So I would hazard to guess that every single person here is a leader. That also means that all of us here need leadership skills. And so now, in one word, what are the leadership skills that you need for whatever role you're currently in? Whether you are a graduate student or a staff scientist or a faculty member, or you're working in industry, what are some of those skills that you find that you need? Yeah, influence. Resilience, so important. Patience, time management, collaboration, listening. Listening is one I've had to grow in a lot over time. Empathy, confidence, passion. Oh, wow, lots more. I love it. There's so many answers, it can barely keep up. That's a good problem to have. Communication, courage, delegating, decisiveness. So good. So these are a lot of really, really important skills. And what I want to focus the rest of this talk on is the challenge that it takes many of these skills. Maybe not every person needs every one of these right now, but you probably baking. Oh, sorry, I just saw that one. That's really awesome. I love it. Maybe you don't need every single one of these right now, but you probably need a lot of these skills. But this raises a huge challenge in science, is that we get trained in all of the technical skills. And so there's all of these things we need, but when and how do we actually learn how to do all of the things that are on this slide, right? When do we learn these leadership skills? And so a confession and a story from me is about the moment when I realized that there were all of these skills I needed to learn, and that, you know, even though I had really amazing mentors all through my PhD, my postdoc, all of my training, I somehow just hadn't ever learned these skills, and no one had told me I needed to. And this moment came about 3 years into my faculty career. I was a new assistant professor a few years in, and I was sitting in my office, and one of my colleagues, who thankfully was also a newer assistant professor, thankfully it was not a really senior colleague, but my newer colleague walked into my office and she shut the door and she said, "Hey, unfortunately, I have some bad news for you." She said, "One of the members of your lab came to talk to me, and they're really concerned because there is this conflict that has broken out in your lab, and it's getting really intense, and people are choosing sides. And if you don't do something about it, you're going to have like this social implosion in your lab." And then she looked at me, and I don't think she said this, but she was like, "Good luck with that, have fun," and left. And I remember sitting in my office and thinking, what do I do? All I wanted to do was crawl under my desk and curl up and cry, or, you know, disappear to somewhere else, because I had no idea what to do. And so in that moment, what I literally did was this. I opened my browser on my computer, I Google searched conflict resolution, I read as much as I could within, about a half an hour or so. And then I sent an email to my lab and said, mandatory meeting, 2 p.m. today. Let's talk about this. And I didn't navigate that conflict particularly well, but then this was a really, really eye-opening experience, because as I came out of it, I realized, oh yes, there are all of these things that are part of my job as a leader, but that I wasn't necessarily trained in, but there's also resources out there and I can learn, right? We all need these leadership skills. They're critical for so much, for managing conflict, having difficult conversations, but also things like setting goals or time management, organizing your calendar, managing your motivation, creating vision, all of those things that you all wrote down. But as scientists, we don't necessarily get trained in this. Or I would say that we absolutely don't receive the same amount of training in these skills as we do in our technical skills. And so that's what inspired me to write Labwork to Leadership. I realized that there are all of these amazing resources out there that we can learn from, but they're not necessarily written for scientists. They're not really put in the context of the sorts of things we deal with, but that I could come in and do that and offer this sort of Cliff's Notes version to all of the different skills. And so if there's one thing that I leave you with today, it is this right here, and this is what we'll dive into for the rest of our time, is that leadership skills are just like our research skills. The first time that you ever, did research or did any science or walked into a lab, whether it was a class or a research lab, you probably looked around and thought, oh, wow, there's all of this equipment that I don't know how to use. And it probably felt pretty foreign. But then over time, you learned how to navigate that space. You learned the skills that you needed to succeed. And leadership skills are just like this. Most of them are not intuitive. We don't just walk into these roles and know how to do things, just like we didn't know how to use, a PCR thermocycler the first time through. But just like our technical skills, we can learn leadership skills by gaining knowledge, practicing, making mistakes, iterating, getting feedback, all of those same things. And no matter what your personality type, no matter what your role, what your preference is, you can build these skills and benefit the people around you. All right, so we're going to take 2 minutes. I never want to give a webinar and have people walk away and you don't do anything differently, right? That doesn't benefit you. I want to make good use of this hour. And so we're going to take 2 minutes and just write down in a notebook or in a note on your phone. But what's a leadership skill that you think you'll need 5 years from now? Envision wherever you might be. And something that's going to be critical to your success, but maybe you haven't learned or you haven't mastered yet. And then also just a note about why this is going to be important for you. All right, so you've identified a leadership skill that you want to build, and you know why it will be important. So now, how do we actually do that? So I want to spend the rest of our time talking through 4 different strategies that you can use to build leadership skills. And you'll probably notice that these have, again, a lot of parallels to how you built your technical research skills, right? We can learn from others, we can develop and practice by doing, we can get feedback to improve, and then we can master something by teaching it to others. So I'll start here, right? That I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but when it comes to leadership skills, we're not inherently experts in this. But the amazing thing is, just like there are experts in science, there are experts out there in leadership and organizational management and psychology. And there is just a wealth of books and podcasts and articles and videos that you can go to learn about pretty much any topic that you might want. I've got a QR code here that goes to some of my favorite leadership books. These are the ones I mentioned in my book. I haven't quite finished out the list, but it's getting really, really close. But if you save that link, it will keep getting populated with more and more ideas of books that you can look at. And then what you can do with that is to also learn from and alongside the people around you, right? Probably there are many people around you who are trying to learn the same leadership skills, and that presents an amazing opportunity. So no matter, what your job is and where you're at, something that pretty much anyone can do is to have some sort of a group, peer learning professional development lunch. This is something that my own lab does. At times we've chosen a book and we get together once a month and everyone brings their lunch and we talk through a section of the book and just discuss what we read. Or a way to do it that's even lower barrier and costs nothing that we're actually doing right now is someone just chooses a podcast or a TED Talk and sends it around to everyone else a few days in advance. It's usually about a half-hour long. We all listen while we're working in lab or commuting or exercising or whatever. And then we get together and we just talk through what that means for us in our roles. And it's a wonderful way to learn from the experts and also learn together. Also, if you're heading out to conferences, either this spring or summer, and you're networking with people, absolutely, you want to talk science, but you can also ask leadership questions. Maybe you ask someone about the role that they have in industry or in academia or who they're mentoring, and ask them, about a certain skill. Say, oh, I'm really struggling to manage my calendar. What have you found works for you? Or, what resources have been most helpful for having difficult conversations, right? We can keep these conversations going with each other. And then one of my favorites that I find increasingly useful the further I go in my career, the more I need mentoring, right? So something that's incredibly useful is what I call a phone a friend. So this is a reference to a game show from decades ago, but where someone, if they needed help, they could just call a friend and say, okay, I need advice right now. What do I do? And I have a sort of list of people who are in similar roles to me. In this case, often it's other department chairs or people who have been chairs. And I know I can just reach out to them. I can text them or I can call them and say, hey, I've got this situation. I bet you faced something similar before. Can I get some thoughts on how you handled this and what advice you have for me? And that has been incredibly, incredibly useful, right? So if you just look around at your peer network, there are a ton of resources there as well. All right, second, just like walking into lab, we develop by doing, right? You can read all you want about an experimental protocol or some technique, but you're not really going to learn it and master it until you try it out for yourself. But at the same time, you want to do that in a really rational way. Maybe the first time you learned a new technique, especially if you were doing something that had safety considerations or that used really expensive equipment, you probably didn't just go in and try it all on your own. Maybe the first time through, you worked with someone else and then you watched them do it, and then you did something yourself with someone else watching you, and then over time you worked up to being really independent in using that skill. And we can do the same thing with our leadership skills, right? An example of what this might look like is if you're like me and needed to build conflict resolution skills, maybe you start out not by just diving in and trying to navigate a conflict, though I had that experience, I didn't have a choice. But if you want to build this in a more conscious way, something I wish I had the chance to do is to sit down with a friend or someone you trust and say, I need to have this difficult conversation. Can we just kind of, act it out, game it out so that I can get a practice at this? And this is a little awkward to do, I will say, but it is way better to do this with a trusted friend or colleague and then be able to do better when it really, really matters than to save it all for that high stakes situation. So maybe you just practice it with a trusted friend. And then maybe the next step isn't to dive into a really difficult situation that you're a part of, but rather to help someone else navigate a conflict. Or to give them advice in something that they're dealing with. And then as you start to master this skill, you might be in a place to serve as a mediator for other people who are in conflict, or to be able to really tackle and lead by yourself a conflict that you're a part of. All right. Third is that we all need feedback, right? We need to know how we're doing. And just like we need feedback, although this is a topic for a separate day, then in science, we don't necessarily give as much feedback either on our research and technical skills as we ought to. And we definitely don't receive it on our leadership unless we ask in most places. And so feedback is so incredibly important. We all know we need feedback, but getting feedback is a really, really challenging thing, right? What makes this challenging? Some of it is that it might, the feedback you receive might touch on something that's part of your self-identity. You might think that you're really, really good at something and you've built a lot of your identity around that. And even if someone doesn't come in and say, oh, you're really bad at that, even if they just come in and say, hey, here's a way that you could be better at that, it can still feel like a threat to that identity that we've built. It can undermine our sense of self-efficacy. This is similar, a little bit less intense, but if you feel like you're motivated because you're good at something, hearing that you need to improve can actually be kind of demotivating, and we need to be able to deal with that. It might come from someone where you think, gosh, why are you the person to give me feedback on that? But it doesn't mean it's not valid feedback. You don't have to listen to all of the feedback you receive, and we can talk about that in the Q&A, but we also shouldn't discount feedback simply because of who it's coming from. And then this is maybe one of the hardest ones, is often feedback requires you to make changes that are difficult, that require either an emotional cost or a time cost or some other real cost to you. And so often the things that we need to improve, we might already know that we need to do those things better. But once someone tells us that, then we have no excuse left. We really have to make that change, even if it's going to be difficult. And all of that is assuming the feedback is delivered well. This is one of the books that's actually on my reading list. It's one of my favorite books about receiving feedback. And something I particularly love about this book is that the title is, thanks for the feedback. But then if you look at the little post-it there, it says, the science and art of receiving feedback. Well, even when it is off base, unfair, poorly delivered, and frankly, you're not in the mood. So it's some real talk about feedback is a really difficult thing, and it's not always delivered well. But even when it's delivered poorly, we can develop a skill of taking feedback, leaving behind the things that are poorly delivered or not helpful, but then pulling the valuable lessons out of it. And so who do we get feedback from? So we need feedback from lots of different people. Something that is often talked about in the leadership literature is this idea of a 360, that you look at people all around you in different types of roles and relationships, which might encompass your advisor or a boss or supervisor or manager or whatever the closest is that you have to that, someone who is further along in the career path, the people around you, your peers and colleagues. You might look to coaches or other experts. And also, really, really importantly, is to get feedback from whoever you are leading or mentoring, because there's a really good chance that even if you're not an official in an official leadership role, you are probably mentoring people, and it's really important to hear from them how you're doing as that mentor. And so how do we do this, right? It can be difficult to ask for feedback as well, but the quality of feedback we receive is often tied to the quality of the questions that we ask. And so I've given you here a few really specific questions. Feel free to screenshot this if you want. I know the recording will be available later as well, but these are some questions that we use in my lab, where we say, my goal is to, be an outstanding leader, do a great job as the safety officer, be a good mentor to new lab members, develop my technical skills. What do you see me doing well, and where can I improve, right? You ask for what is going well. It's not just negative feedback. Sometimes the positive feedback is the most important. What am I doing well that I should keep doing? What can I do differently? You can also then say, I've been working to develop this skill. Where have you seen me improve? Where do I still need to grow? Or what would you prioritize? What's most important as I work towards this goal, right? So those are a couple of good questions you can ask. If you're in a leadership role, trying to get feedback from people who report to you, you might want to do this as an anonymous survey or in some form that people can be candid, but the important thing is to ask the question. All right, and then finally, as kind of the advanced step, one of the best ways to develop a skill is through teaching it to others, right? And we can know this from the education literature. So this is Bloom's taxonomy. This is something that is widely used in thinking about education and pedagogy, and it goes through the different skills, different skill levels as we learn any new thing, right? That the most basic skill is just to remember numbers or facts or concepts, and then you start to understand, you apply, you analyze, but then evaluate and create. And so as you think about teaching a leadership skill to someone else, it really taps into those top levels of Bloom's taxonomy and means that's where you're getting some of the deepest learning of all. And so this might seem difficult because you might think, how can I teach a leadership skill to other people when I'm just learning it myself? But sometimes that makes you one of the best teachers because you understand the difficulty of learning that skill. You know that you don't have it all figured out, but you also likely know more than you even realize. And so one idea here is that if you lead or mentor others, or even are just a group of peers where you're teaching each other, excuse me, you can find some topics that seem of interest. These slides here are some topics from leadership skills that we've talked about in classes I teach or in my lab. But then think about all of the things that you know. You probably know a lot more about that topic than you think. There's probably a lot of things that you as a researcher, as a scientist, have started doing intuitively that you don't even think about how you do that. You know, when something's not working with an experiment, how do you go about troubleshooting that? What's the logic? What are the questions you're asking yourself? How are you making decisions? You might just do that automatically, but you can go back and sort of excavate that knowledge. Think about what goes into that decision making, and then you can take that and teach it to someone else. And the really, really fun thing about this is that often when you do that and teach this skill to someone else, you are going to be the person who in fact learns the most by doing that. I know that that has been so true for me time and again, that when I have to actually think about something like I have here, research ideas, I might be able to see a lot of ideas and say, yes, that one looks good, or no, not quite. Oh, that one has promise. But it wasn't until I went through and really thought about, what are the questions I'm asking? What's my process by which I figure out, what research ideas I think have promise, that I actually learned so much more about how to even think through research ideas, how to take ideas and make them into better ideas. All right, with that, we will now give you a couple more minutes. So go back to that skill that you're wanting to build and spend 3 minutes to just think about and write down answers. You don't have to hit all of these, but as many of them as you can. But think about a resource or a person you can look to for learning. Think about what is the first step or the next step to practicing and developing that skill. Who can you ask for feedback? And write down, be really specific, a question you can ask them. And also, what do you already know that you can share with others? But the most important thing is no matter which of these questions you get through, make sure you get to the last one. And the goal is for every person to leave here with one tangible action item that you can put on your to-do list and that you can do to build this skill. Because really, developing leadership skills, it's not a magical thing. It doesn't happen overnight. But it does take a lot of intentionality. And it's really just all of these small, tangible steps forward that help us to develop the skills that we want to have. All right, I will give you 3 minutes. And again, if you finish early, you can always drop your questions in the chat. All right, that's 3 minutes. Hopefully you made it to setting an action item, put it on your to-do list, put it on your calendar so that you can have one tangible thing that moves you forward in your leadership. And then the key is to keep doing that maybe once a week or once a month, just try to do one thing that might help you to grow those leadership skills in a conscientious way. All right, so I will wrap up with that and then we'll get to the Q&A. So just to wrap up what we've talked about, Leadership skills might not come intuitively to most of us. I know they didn't for me, most of them, but neither did most of our technical skills. I actually have a really embarrassing story I tell my group about the first time I used a pipetter. It was definitely not intuitive, and I definitely realized I needed to read the instructions and learn from someone else before I used it correctly. And leadership skills are much the same. But just as we learned how to do science, we can learn how to lead ourselves and lead others well. And this is a continual practice. Just like there is always more science to learn, and we never master our field, we never master these leadership skills. We are human beings. We are always going to keep making mistakes. It isn't about perfection, but it is about trying to continuously learn, do better, assess, and share with others. And this growth happens through a series of small intentional actions and habits. I am in my mid-40s now, and I tell others that one of the most encouraging and simultaneously depressing realizations I've had in this decade of my life is how much of achieving the things we want in our lives just comes down to these small everyday habits. And that is encouraging because that is something we can do, right? It's not magical. It doesn't take anything special. It just takes some intentionality and finding time and making habits of having these positive practices. It's also a little depressing because it's like, wait, all of this and the secret to like having, you know, a lot of the things you want in life is just habits. But it kind of is what it is. And it doesn't happen automatically, but it also is something that we can make happen through that intentionality. And maybe most importantly is that we owe it to ourselves to develop these skills, and we really owe it to the people who we lead now or in the future, because they are counting on us to develop these skills so that we can be the leaders that they deserve to have. And so with that, I will wrap up, and I absolutely have to thank all of the amazing people on these slides. This is my research group and kind of different iterations over the past couple of years. I did not talk about any of the science they do, but they do really cool science in RNA modification and DNA sensors and self-assembling peptides. But the really amazing part about every person here is that they are phenomenal colleagues. I have the privilege to work alongside them. They drive the ideas for our research, they do the experiments, and they create a culture in our lab that is supportive and kind and collaborative and just really fun. And it is such a privilege to work with each of them. And because of their work, I'm able to do what I do and to be able to join you here today. And thanks again, everyone, for joining. I'm looking forward to taking your questions.
Thank you very much, Jen. That was fantastic. So thank you to those who've already put your answers into the Q&A. Please do continue to type your messages in, and we will try to get through them. So we do already have a few questions in the chat, Jen, so I'll read them out to you maybe one by one. So we have one from Samantha. How do you navigate making difficult conversations easier while managing confrontation?
Oh, that's a good one. This is the skill that I had to learn. I think just reading about this skill and learning tools for difficult conversations was really, really helpful. One of my favorite books on this is Crucial Conversations. And one of their taglines is that the tools that they provide can make it possible to talk to almost anyone about almost anything. And I am a very conflict averse person. And so reading that statement was incredibly empowering, because I realized as I was learning these skills at work that there were so many times in my own personal life when I had wanted to say something and then I didn't, because I didn't know how, and I knew it would go poorly. And then I knew I'd be in a situation where I was in a conflict and I didn't know what to say. And so developing that skill set has been incredibly, incredibly empowering. But it is something that it takes a lifetime. You never master. It takes a lifetime to even start learning. Something I found really, really helpful in those situations is to talk through it with someone else in advance. I have a professional coach, and often when I know I'm going to go into a difficult conversation, we'll actually take some time. We'll take 20 or 30 minutes and just plan out what are some of the things that I'm going to say. I will like write down things I want to say. I envision what the other person might say and then how I want to respond. And so having almost like a script for how to have those difficult conversations can be really helpful. And then the nice thing about that too is that over time, you develop more and more of those scripts. In fact, in the chapter on this topic in Labwork to Leadership, I share a few of my favorite scripts or most useful ones that I've developed over time, that when you need to have a type of a difficult conversation, you can just fall back to that way to word something that's going to help you be the person you want to be and say the things you want to say, even when your emotions might be running high. So I would say get some advice. Often, having those few lines that you come back to, that you can come back to, and just, when you don't know what to say, it's something that you can say to keep the conversation going, and then just keep focused on what outcome you want to achieve. That, why is it worth it to go through that difficulty? Because usually it is worth it.
Thank you. Another question from Rovan. I apologize for my poor pronunciation. What was the most unexpected leadership skill that you had to develop throughout your career?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say besides the conflict resolution, which clearly surprised me, one of the other ones was how to adapt your leadership style to each individual person's needs and preferences and to their personality style and ways of working. And so an example of this is that I'm someone who is already pushing myself really, really hard, right? I'm going full steam ahead. And so I'm someone where when someone shows up and says, you need to work more or you need to do better, that's very demotivating for me. I just am like, okay, I was already, like driving like the pedals to the metal. And if you're telling me that that's not good enough, then I give up. I can't do more. And so I went into my leadership jobs thinking that everyone else around me was like that. I didn't know better. I didn't realize that not everyone operates that way, and that some people, it's not better or worse. We're all wired a little bit differently. We all have different personalities. And a really eye-opening experience was when someone in my lab came to me. They had to get a paper written, and they said, okay, here's what I need you to do. I need you to show up on Monday morning at my office and say, what are your goals for writing this week? How many paragraphs, what sections, how many words are you gonna write? And then you need to look at me and say, I'm gonna come back Friday and check in on you, and I want this to be done. And as they asked me to do that, I like cringed inside, because I thought, oh my gosh, if someone did that to me, I'd spend the entire week in just a ball of anxiety and get nothing done. But for that person, that was exactly what they needed. And it was incredible leadership on their part to recognize that and to advocate for it, whether from me or from someone else, to find, other people who could help them be their best. Incredible, incredible leadership. But then out of that, I realized, oh, wow, every person I work with needs something different. And even that is going to change, and it will vary with whatever different topic we're talking about. And I need to be constantly curious and constantly learning and talking to people about how I can best support them and how I can best customize my leadership to help them be their best.
That's really, really interesting advice there. While we're on that topic, another related question that's come in is, do you tailor your leadership strategy for students or trainees at different career stages, for example, undergraduate, postgraduate, or postdocs?
Yeah, I'd say that it's a little bit career stage. It's also people's experience level, and also the preferences of what things they want to grow and develop expertise in. I will say that one of the really, really frustrating things about leading in academia is that we have this system where, especially as a graduate student, you kind of have to do it all. right? You have to be good at running experiments. You have to be good at driving things to publication. You have to be good at writing. You have to be good at presenting your data and communicating. You kind of have to be good at training and mentoring other people. And that's tough because we each have different strengths and different things that we enjoy doing. And so one of the places where I would get so frustrated reading the leadership literature is reading things like strengths-based leadership. And they would say, oh, well, just learn about the strengths of the people on your team and customize their job duties to the things that they're good at and that they enjoy doing. And I wanted to like throw the book across the room and be like, I can't do that, right? Not as much as I would like. And so that is a definite constraint that we have in a lot of systems, but we can still tailor it quite a bit. So, if there's someone in the group who really loves writing and is very, very good at it, maybe part of their group job is to help everyone with their manuscripts if they want to do that. Or someone who's a phenomenal mentor, maybe then they are in charge of onboarding the new members that come in. So everyone still kind of has to do a lot of different things, but they have a chance to do more of the things where they shine. And then the how you work with people at different stages, I think it's somewhat of a natural evolution that when people come in or when they're newer to science, you're talking a little bit more about the foundational skills, how do you set up a good experiment? How do you troubleshoot something? And then those conversations get to evolve into how do they mentor other people, or how do they write an entirely new proposal? How do they develop the skills they need to be out there leading a team in industry or academia on their own? And that's a very fun evolution. And then part of that as well is, depending on the size of the team you lead, thinking about what structures you need in place, right? When I started out, I had 2 or 3 people in my lab. We were just all in lab together, working together every day, and I more or less mentored every person there. But then very quickly the group grew to a size. I talk with a lot of mid-career faculty who are in this situation of like, oh, that strategy doesn't work for me anymore. I'm a lot busier, my group is a lot bigger, and you have to think about how you delegate. I remember seeing delegate on the list of leadership skills, how you delegate some of that mentoring to more senior people in the lab. You provide them the opportunity to develop as mentors. And then it isn't necessarily that you just offload that duty, but that you take the time you get back and you put that time into mentoring those people who are mentoring others. And so thinking about, more and more as you go through, how you use your time to do the things that only you can do, and how you support other people in doing the things that they can do.
Great, thank you. A couple of questions from Maria. So Maria has read your book and says it's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
She would like to know if there's any formal training or reading you'd recommend, particularly for A, recruitment, and B, which you've already touched on in your first answer, managing difficult conversations or perhaps difficult people.
Yeah, absolutely. For difficult conversations, I really love Crucial Conversations. On the topic, that's more conflict resolution. On the topic of giving feedback, a book that really foundationally changed my leadership is Radical Candor by Kim Scott. It's about how to be direct while still being kind, because I thought you had to choose between those, and it turns out you don't. And she has a lot of really, really helpful, very practical sorts of ways of framing things and thinking about things. On the recruitment topic, I think there's a lot of different types of resources and skills that go into recruitment. There's definitely the communication skills often, or negotiation skills, and that's certainly one kind of set of resources. Something that personally for me I've found really helpful is resources on sort of defining and communicating the culture of your team. And so I don't know if I directly mentioned this in my book, but something that my lab found helpful was this book by Patrick Lencioni called, I think it's The Advantage. And he talks through how to make a sort of playbook for your lab that touches on, your mission and your values and what's most important, and then that feeds into a strategic plan. But what was really useful in there for recruiting is that our group defined our values. What are the things that we value? How do we want to do work? And then once we had defined it, we were able to communicate that in a really clear way and use that to make sure we were recruiting, and when we were interviewing and choosing people and then hopefully convincing people to join us, that allowed us to recruit people who were likely to be successful in our group.
Great, thank you. So let's see, we have a question from Emma. Early leadership often comes with an identity shift. So from being the person who delivers the work to the person who enables others to do it.
Yeah.
What helps people let go of the doer mindset without feeling like they're losing their value? Do you have any advice on that? How to navigate that?
That is really, really tough. Some of that, it comes out of desperation that you just can't hold on to everything and try and do it all. And so you have to let go of some things. Some of it is, you can get there by also thinking about the value they are able to give to people by changing what you spend your time on, right? That as a PI for a lab, I can go spend 2 hours doing experiments in the lab, and that helps my group. But how much more can I help my group if I spend that time working on a grant application or mentoring the people who are going and doing experiments in the lab? So thinking about how that time, even if it's not what you're used to doing, how it's really benefiting the people that you work with. And some of it is giving yourself a little bit of, like one day a month or one day a year when you do get to go and do those things that you used to really enjoy. That can help. If it's something that you really miss, give yourself little pockets of time to do that, but recognize that you're really helping the people around you by committing to those other leadership duties.
Brilliant. So 2 final related questions, one from Joe and one from Hannah. So do you have any advice for essentially when things get tough? So Hannah's saying, we already have a heavy workload. How do you...
Yes.
Do you have any advice for how to prioritize and find time to work on your leadership skills? And Joe's asking, when you have bad days, life, things get blown out of proportion. How do you navigate this?
Oh, well, the time one, the most valuable experience comes from my coach, Amanda Schaefer. And she says the 3 Ds. You can't just pile on more work most of the time. You need to delegate, delay, or delete. Look at the things you meant to get done. Say, what can I give to someone else? What can I shift the due date on? Or what thing just really doesn't need to happen? It would have been good to have happened, but it's just not going to happen. Is really helpful for managing your time. Thinking about how to build leadership skills within that, I think it comes back to the habits, right? You might not be able to set aside a whole day to do a workshop or read a book, though it can be helpful to set aside maybe 1 day a year. Something I try to do is 1 day a year or a half day where I reflect on what have I achieved and where have I grown in the last year? What are my goals for the next year? But really finding ways to build the leadership development into things you're already doing. So I listen to podcasts on my drive to work, on my morning workout, or I just think through what's, one small little 5-minute habit that I'm going to have and I'm going to use in every meeting, or what's something I'm going to tell myself in my head before I go into every meeting to be the leader I want to be. It's all of those little things that don't take a lot of time. It just takes a little bit of mental bandwidth, which I know is really tough right now as well. But if you can build the habit, it just becomes automatic. And then on the bad days, have some trusted people you can go talk to. Have friends and family that, are a therapist, counselor, coach, people who are in your corner, because it is so hard to be a leader. Everyone has bad days. And honestly, it's okay to be vulnerable and share with your team when you're going through tough times too. I just recently had a conversation with my own group where I shared that, December was a tough month and I was in kind of a frustrated, low place. And but I'm doing my best. You can kind of share that, like, hey, things are really tough right now, but we're going to get through this. We'll get through it together. And that actually is an incredible contribution as a leader, because the people you're working with they're going to hit tough times too. They're probably going through tough times. And if they think you never struggle, they might think they can never be where you are. But if they know that, hey, leaders struggle, they have bad days, but we get through them, then it makes it look like something that they can do as well, and helps build their confidence for them to know that they can be wherever they want to be as a leader as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Jen, for a really inspirational talk. I'm sure I speak for most of the audience when I can say at least one thing I can go away and work on myself now. So really valuable. Thank you very much. Then thank you to everyone who attended today. You can continue the conversation online. Please do so by following the Biochem Society on Blue Sky and on X. Then for the good news, so as mentioned earlier, we're providing some lucky attendees with a chance to win a copy of Jen's book, Labwork to Leadership, which, as we heard, is fantastic. So congratulations to our winners, who I can now announce are John Clark Cargill, Hannah Britt, Colin Hammond, and Joe Sadler. So 4 lucky winners. Congratulations. The Biochemical Society team will be in touch soon to confirm further details. Yeah, congratulations and enjoy the book. So we always welcome suggestions for future topics and speakers, as mentioned at the beginning. If you have an idea for a webinar in 2026, we do encourage you to please submit a proposal for an upcoming webinar or speaker. You can find more information about webinars at the Biochemistry Society website, which is biochemistry.org. And all of our upcoming webinars are listed on the website. And if you've missed any, and I'd really recommend this, if you've missed any, go back and look at the 100+ webinars that have already been run and which are available to watch. So you can find these on the website or on the YouTube channel. The recording from today's webinar will also be available to watch within the next couple of weeks. Finally, just to encourage you to please get involved with or join the Biochemical Society if you haven't already. So some really great benefits of joining: discounted registration fees for society courses and meetings, exclusive access to a wide range of grants and bursaries, personal online access to 2 of their journals, and more. I've benefited from this personally, so I was lucky to receive a small grant and some other really great opportunities from the Biochemical Society. So please do make the most of it. Join and apply for those things. And as always, visit their website to find out more. So with that, thank you to everyone, especially thank you to Jen. And that's all. Have a good day.
Thanks for having me.